Hello and welcome everybody to the first ready.ca dispatch. Mark, I don't know if you like the name dispatch or not, but
yeah,
that's
dispatch is good.
Yeah, I think I like that. My name is Joey Temprile. That's Mark Jeftovic. And Mark and I are endeavoring to create something with ready.ca for high agency Canadians who I want to say are interested in hunkering down a little bit, are not interested in giving up on Canada, not interested in moving their families, uprooting their lives, uprooting their careers, and want to find a way to flourish even as things around them seem to be crumbling a little bit. One of the reasons that, I wanted to participate in Ready, I have a young family. I have a job. I have a career. My parents are here. My friends are here. And I've seen, how great things can be in this country. I was born in the late 80s, as you know, Mark. And so I remember the good times of the 90s and aughts, feeling safe going out at night, feeling safe going to restaurants and crowded events. And we'll talk today about how that may not be the case anymore. But I think it can be the case again. These things, the problems that are hampering us are not unique to Canada, which is, one item that may be worth discussing down the road, but I think they're all fixable problems in the medium term. So the question really for me and maybe for you too, and for everyone who's listening and watching is, what can I do to get from here to there, from now until then, and make myself feel comfortable, confident, and really be successful during that period? I don't know, Mark, what do you think? What is Ready CA to you? Why did you want to do this thing?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, this idea. I mean, I've had it ever since I sort of came into possession of the domain name, which happened via business acquisition we did. We bought a web hosting company about 15, 17 years ago called Ready Networks, and they owned the ready.ca domain name. And I always had it in the back of my mind in the early days, like a prepper network, right? Crazy people living in the woods, in log cabins in the woods with tins of food and guns. And I guess we haven't landed too far from that today, is almost where things are going. But seriously, though, the idea has changed. The nuance has changed. And to your point, we all have things worth staying for, I don't want to use the word fighting for, like this isn't, I don't want to sound like some kind of militia or something, but there's something worth standing your ground about. You hear a lot of high agency Canadians, which is who we want to target here at Ready, who just say, well, Canada's cooked. Let's just leave. I'm going to just leave. I'm going to go to Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, or I'm going to move to Florida, or I'm going to Texas or some other place where they feel like, streets paved with gold, land of milk and honey and liberty and all that sort of thing. There's a couple of things I would say about that. One is what's happening in Canada is happening everywhere. It's happening all over the world. And maybe there's some holdout places where it's taking longer to happen, but those places aren't immune. So if we don't dig in our feet and try and push back on this wall of whatever is happening here, you're going to have to push back on it wherever you flee to down the road. And what's happening basically is Canada is turning into basically a woke tard griftocracy, right? Where so the rule of law is broken down, it's rampant corruption, and this policy is being set by the stupidest members of the public. So what we wind up with are these virtue signaling priorities that are so self-destructive that it becomes almost a thought crime to call attention to the destructiveness of these policies. And we're going to talk about some of this stuff going on today in some of the stories that we're covering. But the point is, if you leave, it's to where, and if you stay, it's why are you staying and what are you fighting for? And I also think that the people who do the high agency productive Canadians who stay are going to be the most savvy, tenacious, high acumen people you're ever going to get because they're gonna succeed against almost insurmountable odds. So if you can succeed here, you can succeed anywhere, especially over the next 10 or 20 years.
There's a good group of people who I think are interested in that thesis. And one of the things we want to do with this show every week is talk about a few stories. Like you mentioned, things are going sideways, but they don't have to go sideways for you. And so, what happened? Why did it happen? How can you protect yourself from it? We'll start today with something that's in the news. The Salsa Festival in Toronto, a significant event, a shootout, it sounds like, which is pretty wild to see for a festival that's really, a sort of cultural staple. This is an almost 15-year-old festival, 2 people dead, multiple people injured. We've all seen the videos at this point of the response from, emergency crews and first responders. It's maybe worth mentioning that the press conference related to the incident was hijacked by the deputy mayor, talking about how he's sick of the crime, sick of the degeneracy, sick of the whatever words he used. We got to, I think the quote was, lock these guys up for 20 years. I personally don't think that's long enough. Mm-hmm. But, if you look at like what happened here, we're at the point now in big cities where, I will speak for myself. I won't necessarily say that you feel the same way, although I suspect you do, honestly, Mark. We've not talked about this, but you'd have to drag me kicking and screaming to an open air, big public event in a big city at this point. Everything from like Jurassic Park outside the ACC to watch a Raptor game, to Caravana, to Salsa Festival, to, whatever. I would have you'd have a very difficult time convincing me that going to something like this was a good idea, mostly because there's the fact of the matter is that while you can put up like cement blocks and bollards to prevent, vehicle events, which we've seen over the years, is difficult to do it with guns. We seem to refuse to do it with guns. And more you're finding these stories where it really is always the same, right? The elements of the story are identical, sort of week to week. Bad guy with a gun, good guys have no guns. Cops show up late, are either ill-equipped, incompetent, or just not there when they need to be. And sometimes it's no fault of their own. Other times it is. But in any case, the effect and the outcome are the same. So, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this one. And obviously there's others similar in nature happening around the country, although not quite as close to home for you and I.
Yeah, well, in this particular event, and this is spilled out even further because some of the early rumors or, word on the street, AKA X, was that this wasn't a terror event. It was a targeted shooting, which means it was kind of a squabble between whatever gang elements, criminal elements. And we're hearing more and more about various criminal elements running over Canada. And there's a lot of common factors and threads that weave through them. We don't know the facts now, so I don't even want to speculate, because if we speculate wrong, then we just look stupid. But the one common element out of the checklist that you ran down, I will guarantee you that whoever is responsible is out on bail from a previous offense. That's a lock. That's 100%. We can go out on a limb right here and say whoever did this should not have been out on the street. There was another event this morning, Cherry Beach. There was a shootout. Could be related, might not be related. But again, that person fled Brampton man name. So we do know the name there. And I think that one was out on a previous offense. So like this is always happening. And then obviously the 2-tier justice system, the immigration discount, the people who are caught red-handed, dead to rights, committing crimes are getting discounts because throwing the book at them will jeopardize their immigration status. I don't understand the reasoning at all. I'll put the brakes on here because we don't know that was the case in the Salsa Festival, other than, like I said, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm calling it here. I'm calling it now. Whoever the gunmen were out already on bail, previous offenses.
Yeah, the problem is really twofold, right? Like there's no consequences for the criminals, but also no consequences for the judges. And so you have
Mhm.
these stories over and over and over again every week about, well, here's another guy who's out on bail, another guy who is, a known criminal. He's known to police. He's, in some cases now, I think police are finding it a worthwhile way to cash in a little clout and a little capital, probably with their judicial peers. They're willing to make these announcements, these like public statements about how this guy's likely to reoffend. We're being told we have to release him. He is likely to reoffend. He is a danger to society. Here's what he looks like. Here's what his name is. You should stay away. And if you see him doing anything weird, call somebody. You make these people pariahs in your community, which is strange, right? Because if I was to make someone a pariah in my community short of the public statement from police, chances are I would hear from my employer about it at some point,
Yeah.
I would certainly hear from like my family or friends or people in the community. They may be bleeding hearts for these criminals in a lot of ways. That may sound crazy, but when you look at the election patterns and the sort of the voting patterns of Canadians, I mean, what else am I to take from this? I will note though that what has been like a pretty solid like base of voters, I would call them the R Canada crowd on Reddit. I don't know if you visited that subreddit recently, starting to turn against a lot of these soft on crime, soft on immigration, soft on recurring offenses, judicial policy, crime policy. I will call it liberal policy because there's not really a better way to phrase it. So you're seeing this stuff change a little bit. It gives me a little bit of hope, I think. I don't know where you come down.
I find that surprising because I think I'm banned from Reddit across the board, every single subreddit. I'm not allowed on there. I do kind of lurk under sock puppet names, but that surprises me that you can even utter those thoughts on Reddit. There's I'm not gonna out my kid. So I have a kid who's in university, and on their second week on campus, a man was arrested on campus who was out sexual offenses. He's a sexual offender. He's a rapist. He was busted on campus. He's not supposed to be there. He got put away. I've been keeping a file on this guy over this child of mine is now heading in the third year. This guy's been rearrested 3 times. And the cops, to their credit, I think just the moment he gets released, they just kind of follow him around because they know he's going to reoffend within hours, like violate the conditions of his parole. He goes someplace where he's not supposed to be, and then they put him away. He gets out in about 50 days again from his current lockup. School starts in, call it 40 days. And he's going to be banned from the downtown core. It's like, banned from the downtown core. It's like, he has to telephone into his correctional officer every day. So
it's only funny because it's sad. That's all.
I know. So I was so pissed off when I read this. I know the MP for that riding. So I flipped him an email, and I don't want to dox the MP either. I don't want to dox anyone. So say a member of parliament, he called me back and he took me through what happened in Canada since, let's call it for what it is, since the Trudeau Liberals came into power in 2015. And he said in 2015, after the Liberals came in, they commissioned a study, and the takeaway from it was that the prison population in Canada was overrepresented by, Indigenous and visible minorities. Mm-hmm. So there was too many, visible minorities in prison, and relative to the population. And that meant that the prison system was systemically racist. And so out of that commission, they issued a series of sentencing guidelines to judges to try and literally mathematically balance out the prison population so it more accurately reflected the actual demographics. And he said to me, the murder rate has skyrocketed since then. And you can probably trace it all back to like 1,400 people who aren't in prison who should be in prison. There's only about 15,000 federal prisoners in Canada. But that number was taken down to about 13,000. I'm not totally remembering the numbers as a result of some of these policies. And these policies basically are like now coming home to roost, where it was, you don't judge the man by the crime, you judge the man by his demographic and does it fit the proportions, and then you have to moderate around it. It's like when Trudeau said exactly half his cabinet had to be female because this was 2050.
I remember that.
So it's like 50-50. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's not an exact science. Like, merit is not an exact science. Sometimes it shakes out one way, sometimes it shakes out the other. Same with crime, You can deconstruct or you can dissect why the imbalance is there, but you still have to prosecute the crimes, right? And maybe if you thought, okay, there's a component of people who are in these prisons because of systemic racism. Okay, fine. Let's review the case of every single one of them that is in prison right now. And if anyone was put in there as a result of systemic racism, like in proportion, like disproportionately to their crime, then you kick all those people out. Like, let them out because they are direct victims of this rigged system. But you don't then try to apply it on a forward basis to say, okay, like this guy just robbed a store and shot somebody, but we're not going to put him behind bars because that sort of messes up the ratio. That's just crazy. Like it's the opposite of common sense.
Yeah, wait until you hear about the hiring practices at all these different federal government agencies. You may find that similar problems. Let's go to our second story of the week here. This one about the new digital regulator coming to Canada. Very strange. A 5-person panel appointed by cabinet ministers with no judge, jury oversight really at all. And, maybe most alarmingly, in the interim, before the panel is full, this body's capabilities can be carried out by one person in the meantime. One person can wake up and decide that there's a problem they need to figure out, let's say, on social media or otherwise. I don't know. Obviously, we talk about these stories on Axis of Easy, and we talk about them on the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast, and you're writing about them on Bomb Thrower, and we're doing the stuff for Ready. I'm still shocked when I see stuff like this. It's hard for me to understand how any rational person views this level of power being given to an unelected and really, in principle, unaccountable, I should say, body. It doesn't make any sense unless, of course, you assume that the reason these bodies are being created, and we're removing, we're removing these arm's length committees that work for a long time in Canada, and giving new powers to new bodies, the super regulator, as it's being tagged here by many. The reason they're doing it is because they want that power to be unaccountable, and they want that power to be fluid, and they want that power to be wielded, right, in a way that just it hasn't been wielded in the past. Social media is obviously a hot button issue here in the States. It's everywhere. It's not just in the Commonwealth. Many different countries around the world are doing this stuff. The question is, what is this going to accomplish? Number one. Number two, who is it going to affect? Just the people that we're being told it will affect, or will it affect others as well? There's obviously some concern there around the digital ID stuff and other legislative actions being taken in Canada. And then maybe the third and most important thing is, what does it mean as far as having like a ratchet strap on the way that you are able to access and use the internet? Is this the first and last step, or like many other government policies around control, around the removal of anonymity, around what you're allowed to say online? Is this just the first step of many more that will become more and more oppressive as time goes on? Where do you come down there, Mark?
Well, I'll start by saying that anything they do, no matter how totalitarian it may sound, is actually ultimately futile, because the technology is already there to just completely circumvent it. It may be too hard for most people to use now, but the way it is moving forward in leaps and bounds, it's just you're going to have this absolute frictionless social media-like experience, for lack of a better word, that's going to be running over completely decentralized, encrypted, unblockable rails. I mean, we're already seeing, Nostr VPN, there's Nostr, there's other technologies like it. It's just, so they're not going to stop the signal. And the reason that there is such a global phenomenon to stop the signal is because there's a big credibility crisis, and that's been happening slowly, faster in some places. COVID was a big moment when a lot of people kind of, orange pilled or red pilled themselves, depending on where you fell on the spectrum. And they kind of woke up and went, hey, wait a minute. Either we're being told outright lies, or we're having our rights stripped away from us, or our leaders are just completely out of their depth, and there's no accountability and no responsibility for just completely fucking things up. And so, I misread that situation after the pandemic was over. I thought there would be a massive public backlash, and to some extent there is, and there was. But these same governments who enacted these measures, the same government who froze our bank accounts and declared the Emergencies Act, got reelected, right? At least here in Canada. Twice. Yeah. So, in that sense, it hasn't changed, but yet, there isn't really much of a middle ground. Like, I think there are more people on thinking the way we're thinking than you would guesstimate from reading the CBC or Toronto Star. You would sort of think that, elbows up is ubiquitous. And I don't think it is. And I don't think the policymakers think it is either. That's why they're trying to clamp down on this.
Totally. I could not agree with that more. And I think the idea that silence means consensus is now like firmly outdated. Yeah. Most people are waiting to see what happens to the first person who sticks their head up. They're not willing to be that person. Maybe, I think some of the people that ready.ca will appeal to are ready to be that person, have the wherewithal, the resources, the community to be that person. And if you don't, we want to make you that person via our community. It's funny, there's I think a bit of a silver lining around all this. There's another sort of adjacent story that I'll share that we did not have today. But one of the silver linings is that I think losing the information war really has forced the government to show its hand a little bit in terms of what in terms of what they know they can do and can't do. So this is the recent, I think this was unearthed by Blacklocks last week, that Canada had drafted legislation or
wasn't legislation, it was
like a memorandum of some kind paper. About what can we do to people who post false and misleading information, includes, by the way, true information taken out of context. You can be the judge about that. Are we in a technical recession? I don't know. Is that misinformation? I don't know. But the point is that part of the action they were considering is that they were thinking about maybe suing people who post information. So, you can see here, I'll highlight the important part. The ISED wants to determine when material is, quote, factually incorrect, misleading, or out of context. It also singles out social media platforms as, quote, channels where misinformation related to the department's mandate is most likely to appear or spread. Now, I'll tell you why I think there's a silver lining here. You mentioned the pushback that sort of only came in part after COVID. Could I convince you that from 2020 through 2025, basically anytime you went against the current thing narrative, you ran the risk of being targeted, not targeted by the government per se, but targeted by the government's deputies, your employer, your grocery store, your neighbors. You'd be canceled, depersoned, exactly. And the government never really had to do anything. It was this idea that you don't have to get the COVID shot, but if you want to go to the restaurant won't allow you in without the COVID shot. The grocery store, the gym, the school won't allow you in without the COVID shot. It's not our fault. You don't have to do anything. But if you don't, here are the consequences. You don't have to think that, maybe the George Floyd, incident was exactly as we say it is every day, all day for 3 weeks straight in 2020 or 2021, whenever that happens. But if you say that you disagree, be prepared, because your university may have a problem with that. Your employer may have a problem with that.
Yeah.
These things ran roughshod over free thinkers for 5 years. You know what the problem is now, Mark? No employer or university is willing to take that action anymore. None. And the problem, like you mentioned, is that there is this crisis of credibility. And the silver lining here is that the government knows that the people who are speaking out are well endowed in terms of their financial status, well endowed in terms of their community. And the only way the government can hurt them is to force them into legal processes like this, suits and other adjacent things. That tells me that they realize they are running out of options, and they have to try and scare people down from speaking their mind when it is anti-narrative. And this is an extreme measure that I think you'd only start talking about if you had to take an extreme measure. And here it is, right front and center. They are losing the information war. Everybody knows it, including them. And that's why you see something like this. You're winning this fight if you're a free thinker in Canada, which is one of the reasons why Ready is so important. I think we are making progress. Even if I don't see it on TV, I can feel it in the community that I'm in. And, we want more people in that community, right?
Yeah, they're circling the wagons is what this looks like to me, because they didn't have to in the past. You're absolutely right. Like, there were things you took serious career risk by going out and saying, even something like as uncontroversial today as saying, yeah, COVID came out of a lab. Like, everybody knows, like that was a career ender, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But now you're not going to get canceled for saying COVID came out of a lab. You're not going to get canceled for saying, I think the COVID vaccines did more damage than people are letting on. You don't get canceled today for saying we're letting in too many immigrants. I got nothing against immigration, high quality immigration, but we're letting in too many, too soon, too fast. You don't get canceled for that anymore. Sometimes people will try to cancel you, and they'll be like, maybe Rachel Gilmore will like lose her shit about you, but no one cares, right? Cancel culture from the far left is kind of dead. So the government has to do their own dirty work now, and that's why we're getting bills like this. And we'll see because Joey, I hate to say it, but we're the first two sticking our heads up from the Ready tent.
Oh, right? Oh no.
And we'll see how it goes. But we have to sort of dig in our heels and do what we can and lead by example. We're not without resources. We're not without friends and networks. So, I'm not thinking, they're going to come after Bitcoiners for saying the inflation rate is debasing the currency. I think we're a long way from that. But they could come after anyone who says something like, a central bank digital currency is an easy way to implement, personal carbon footprints if they wanted to go there. I mean, that might be, that's a far right talking point,
Yeah. Yeah. There's interesting, data points. I don't have it handy, so I won't pull it up, and we're running a little long here, our first rip, but one thing I've thought a lot about over the last year or so is the credibility behind something like the CPP. And, CPP went from being something that people only talked about when they turned 60 to something that advertises during NBA All-Star Weekend about how well-funded and secure their assets are. Now, I don't know. I'm spoiling a little bit what I'm going to bring up on CBP Monday. Tomorrow night. But that the CPP released a position paper last week where they are discussing openly abandoning any measuring metrics basically for their performance because they are quote unquote outdated and just don't fit the moment anymore.
That's like when they stopped reporting M3 money supply. That was in the States, right? It was like, we don't need to report that anymore because you just don't want to look at it.
That's right. And so you just wonder, what if you start talking about the CPP performance, will you be someone who's targeted? Anyway, I don't know. We're gonna finish tonight with something it's near and dear to me because I was in my past life a teacher. At least I finished teachers college, and so I have a soft spot here for kids who try and do things a little differently and find things that maybe are a little off the beaten path. This is from a friend of the front of the program, I suppose I can call him Michael Geist, talking about how the Bill C-34 intended consequences will not match the consequences in practice. And really, he's talking about this double blackout phenomenon where government wants to stop certain kids from seeing certain things on social media, including news, when they deem it to be extreme or otherwise undesirable. Let's say, I'm using some soft language here. Maybe by episode 5, I'll change the way I'm speaking. But the problem really is that when a kid stops getting access to news online, X, Facebook, whatever, what they don't do, Mark, is they don't head to the convenience store and grab a copy of the Globe and Mail. They don't do that. What they don't do is bust out the iPad, get mom to verify the age with the thumbprint, and then subscribe to the electronic version of the Toronto Star. They don't do that. They don't Google Bruce Arthur to find out what the latest thing that a once prominent sports writer is whining about in the TDS column of the Toronto Star that week. What happens is they just don't read any news at all. They disconnect from the media, the news of the day. And then in general, what you find is that one of two things happens there. Either it leads them to completely disconnect from civic life, which we do not want, or they become uninformed civic participants, which, maybe worse, maybe better. Michael Geist has written about this a lot. And, you and I have talked about this offline, online, anywhere that'll have us. The idea that the government clearly is interested in protecting young people from information that may make them anti-government. And I think nowadays, one of the other things you're seeing, and the World Cup really brought this to center stage in a lot of ways. There's a lot of, I think, push from our media to make sure that kids feel a certain way about America and then an opposite certain way about Europe. Mm-hmm. And, I look at the way that our prime minister handles his communications strategy and the way he handles his political dealings and the things I see on the television screen, the things I don't see on the television screen. And pretty clear to me that there's a relationship or desired relationship picture that this government wants to paint, that Europe wants to paint. And there's always one thing they want you to think compared to what you would think if you saw data or were able to access Twitter or access news and maybe post anonymously on these forums and engage with people on things like Twitter, Facebook, Discord, whatever. I want to know from you, you have a daughter, obviously, who's in the, in that zone where she's got a father who cares about this stuff and maybe friends that don't. And this is, affecting what's going on with all that. I don't know. To me, again, the tools are there. Question mark is, are people going to use them? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so this is like the second of a double tap that has happened with Canadian media sources being sort of quashed from the internet. And the first one was, I always get my bills mixed up. It was C-18 or C-8 from the last administration, which was when they implemented, the link taxes or whatever on social media, and like Facebook just said, yeah, well, fuck you. We're just not going to show Canadian news sources on the thing. And I tweeted, I think just yesterday, because I got a notification, from Facebook. I hardly ever go on anymore. It's tumbleweeds in there, but I click to look at this notification and it's a guy I know. And like his first two things are like, we can't show you this picture because of Canadian legislation, or we can't show you this story because of Canadian legislation. And the second one is, we can't show you this because of Canadian legislation. And I don't think Canadians understand, like, if you own a business and you're trying to increase your reach through getting news mentions or whatever, like, you're being attenuated on one of the, the biggest platforms out there. I know I said it's tumbleweeds, but it's still sizable. And you don't understand what this government legislation did to attenuate your reach in the global marketplace. And so there's everything Michael Geist said about how this will impact kids who are affected by this ban, but there's a couple other pieces to it. And one of them circles back to our earlier story. So the one is, all this succeeds in doing is in throttling Canadian signal, right? And Canada is usually the CanCon country because I've always thought it's because we have such an inferiority complex of being next to the largest economy on earth that we sort of like, look for this Canadian angle on everything. And when we find one, we just like wave the flag like crazy. And the fact that the richest man in the world is a Canadian, or, you know, half Canadian, and is completely unremarked upon in the Canadian media, is a sort of example of how like mass formation psychosis has taken over the zeitgeist here. But the point is, all we're succeeding in doing is making it harder for Canadian signal to get out, because the cost benefit of dealing with all these Byzantine Canadian regulations is just it exceeds the value of doing business in Canada. So the reality is, most of the technological world takes place outside of Canada, with non-Canadian companies running non-Canadian networks on non-Canadian protocols, and the world basically ticks along without Canada. And then Canada erects all these stupid rules that say, if you want to do business in Canada, you got to do this and this and this and this, and that previous story, or we're going to fine you 5% of your global revenue, right?
Yeah.
What's every non-Canadian technology company going to do? They're just going to go, hell yeah, fuck Canada. Canada's a backwater. And so Canada is going to turn into this digital North Korea, where, you know, we're kind of banging rocks together and grunting to each other in these low fidelity sort of memes that can't propagate anywhere because no one's going to carry them. Like, you know, right at the carrier level, it's like, oh no, that's a Canadian packet, and I got to fill out 15 fucking forms in triplicate and pay tax on it if I route that packet. So I'm just going to drop it at the edge of my network, and I'm not even going to deal with those crazy fucking igloo dwellers.
The problem, I think, as well, is that there's ways to fix this that are like very clear that we just refuse to embrace, right? Like, if you want Canada to be a place where people are willing to pay a little more to get their news, their network, whatever, in front of Canadians, and one of two things has to happen. Canadians have to become more productive and have more money to spend with those types of services and products. We refuse to do that. Or we have to be able to compete. We have to have businesses that are willing to say, we don't need you to support us anymore if you let Americans in. Like, we're happy to compete. We have a superior product. We have all these things. You and I both have a lot of American friends. When I tell people, you know, specifically about the CBC, how much money we spend on propping up the CBC, and then how much money of that money the CBC spends on making sure that they have, you know, a certain amount of DEI hires, that we can't ever see how many paying subscribers to CBC Gem are out there. We can't do any of these things, all while shows like this, you may remember this, I brought this up on a show last week or a couple of weeks ago. CBC, you know, had a show called Little Mosque on the Prairie for a long time, failed. CBC, you know, sort of its most famous shows, the ones that really people go to CBC to watch, are often syndicated, stuff like Coronation Street, Hockey Night in Canada, which they're going to lose this year. You know, I just don't know what the value prop is for these guys anymore. And to your point, they don't know how they're going to stay afloat either, because they are the ones demanding this subsidy. And, you know, we talked about this on Access It Easy, but over the last, you know, 5 or 6 years or 10 years, something like that, Canada's lost over 600 media outlets. Did you know that? Of varying sizes. And, you know,
I believe it.
Yeah. And you can talk about, it's easy to say like, well, those media outlets didn't have an audience or they're fringe or whatever. But I would say to you, listener, viewer, that CBC doesn't have an audience either. And CTV doesn't, and City TV doesn't, and, you know, the Globe doesn't, and Torstar and NatPost. These are not viable businesses. What you're seeing is government picking winners, which is, you know, the thumb on the scale that's given us so many of the problems we have to deal with today, whether it's in free speech regulation, whether it's in media regulation, whether it's in social media bans or electric vehicles or oil and gas or anything. And one of the reasons Ready, I think, is going to be so popular is because everyone sees the problems, and they're tired of playing the game with the thumb on the scale. They're going to remove themselves, find a community of people who want to be, you know, productive but protected, want to be able to exert power but not necessarily have to participate in all the madness. This is what you're going to get here. And I think people, when they see what we're doing, it's going to resonate, even if they've never thought to articulate it this way before. This is what we're trying to figure out. Like, what can we do to help you get through the next 10 years while the thumb is on the scale? Because I think we agree on this. It's not going to last forever. it cannot last forever. I will not, stay here and watch in silence this managed decline of a once great nation. I will not do it. And I don't think anyone's going to want to do it.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to leave it off, but I do wonder what it's like the second foundation or the first foundation, right? It's like we got to get through 1,000 years of dark ages, and we've got to preserve the knowledge and the heritage and the legacy of rationality and economic ingenuity to sort of survive this era of just, I don't know what to even call it, because everything you call it just is kind of tropey sounding and just kind of makes you look like a reactionary, but it's not cogent and it's not rational. So
that's it. Good first episode. Come back next week or whenever we get another one out. It's summer vacation, obviously, so the cadence might be a little off for the first little bit. But trust me, there will be more. In the meantime, ready.ca, go sign up, take the readiness test. I promise you'll be surprised where you're short in terms of preparedness. And sign up for the forum as well. Talk to other people from Canada, from your community, from your ideological circle that maybe you didn't know, wouldn't have met otherwise. And let's see what we can do together. Until next time, take care of yourselves.